The Republican Party has held power in the House of Representatives since January of 2023. And in the spirit of Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, I'm stuck asking, what have they accomplished? In the political theater that was the 2022 midterm elections, Republicans didn't just spotlight the issue of immigration. They turned it into a blazing, headline-grabbing inferno. In April of 2022, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a maestro of controversy, decided to make a spectacle. How? By shipping asylum seekers, arriving in his state by bus, straight to Washington, D.C., New York, and Chicago. Why? To shine the spotlight on the surge of migrants crossing the southern border, conveniently blaming it on the policies of Democratic President Joe Biden. But the drama didn't end there. Enter Arizona Governor Doug Ducey, who eagerly joined the theatrical effort. Then cue the grand entrance of Florida Governor and soon-to-be presidential candidate Ron DeSantis, orchestrating a mid-September stunt where nearly 50 migrants were airlifted to a wealthy island in Massachusetts. It was politics as a high-stakes performance, and the audience, the American people. And as if that wasn't enough, a July 2022 report by America's Voice exposed the full-throttle campaign strategy: 121 political ads by July of 2022, 334 tweets, and 91 campaign emails, all ringing with the ominous tones of white replacement and migrant invasion throughout the entire 2022 election cycle. Now that they're in power, the GOP has tied crucial aid to Ukraine and Israel to southern border funding, only to turn a blind eye when it actually comes to securing the border. Why? Purely to deny President Biden a win during the most pivotal and crucial election since 1864. In the expansive realm of the United States-Mexico border, the federal agencies work tirelessly to ensure security. However, a different narrative unfolds in right-wing media chambers, particularly on Fox News, which paints a vivid picture of an unmonitored wasteland, a wild frontier where the term open borders reverberates with staggering frequency. 3,282 mentions on Fox News and 2,727 on Newsmax between November 1st of 2020 and March 16th of 2023. The expiration of Title 42, a Trump-era policy aimed at swiftly sending asylum seekers back across the border to curb COVID-19 spread, marked a turning point. Despite fears of an immediate surge, recent data showed a steady increase in migrants crossing the U.S.-Mexico border, reaching a record high of over 200,000 at that time. And behind the scenes, Customs and Border Protection, with over 60,000 federal employees and a budget in the billions, stood as a massive force. Yet public perception, fueled by right-wing media rhetoric, often diverges. A Gallup poll this past June revealed a nation divided, with 39% labeling the border situation as a crisis, 33% as a major problem, and 22% as a minor problem. I'm so glad to be joined with Representative Jasmine Crockett, who represents Texas's 30th Congressional District, for a night like this to delve into this topic and more. Representative Crockett, thank you so much for being on the political mic tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Representative Crockett, with the ongoing negotiations in the Senate regarding a border security deal and the potential disintegration of the agreement, how do you perceive the delicate balance between achieving bipartisan solutions and the internal divisions within the Republican Party, as highlighted by the hesitancy and outright refusal to support this deal? You even have Senator Steve Daines of Montana, the chair of the Senate Campaign Arm Committee, saying that he would not support the bipartisan border deal, a deal that includes things that they've been calling for years.
Yeah, I think that you've summarized it very well. This is nothing more than political theater and political games. And it's one of those situations I feel like that the Republicans keep running into, is the situation where the dog catches the car and then they don't know what to do with it. They have complained and complained and complained to the extent that they have won the rhetoric game and the public perception. And unfortunately, we know that there's a certain attitude towards migrants at this point, an attitude that, in my opinion, is very un-American right now. We know that we've seen an increase in violence due to the rhetoric around migrants. We know that there were some migrants, actually, it wasn't even migrants, but in El Paso, we know that there was a family that was run off the road because they were perceived to be migrants, and they actually were U.S. citizens that had just crossed the border from visiting family. And so these are the types of issues that we're going to run into, in addition to just kind of the misinformation and the disinformation. Now, the one thing that I can say about the Senate, and I've never been a fan of a Senate, whether it was when I was in the State House, I wasn't a fan of the Texas Senate. And now that I'm in the U.S. House, I'm typically not a fan of the U.S. Senate. But considering all the chaos and nonsense we've dealt with in the U.S. House, seems like the big kids on campus are across the street in the Senate. And so, the fact that the Senate understands what it is to govern, and I can't say that I would have liked this bill. I don't even know if I would have voted for the bill, but I do know that they banged out a bill that was going to inflict pain, both from where the Democrats wanted to be, as well as from where the Republicans wanted to be. And actually, that's what governing looks like. It looks like compromise. It looks like someone feeling some kind of pain in order to kind of get the job done and meeting in the middle. And so the fact that they worked on it, and the fact that the Do Nothing House, which has caused this to be the most unproductive Congress in modern day history, says it's dead on arrival, as if they have any solutions to anything. It's just astronomically wild to me. These are the same people that couldn't figure out who they wanted to win their popularity contest and decide who they wanted to be the Speaker of the House. And then once they got him, after 15 rounds, they decided, never mind, we don't like that guy. And what did they do? We had to go round and round and round again to try to get a win, all for what? So that they can have a leader that says, oh, we're not going to do anything. Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm glad that you used the term the Do Nothing Congress. It reminds me of Harry Truman's phrase referring to the 80th Congress, which he dubbed the Do Nothing Congress, the Congress of 1946. But at least the Congress of 1946 gave us the Taft-Hartley Act and the Marshall Plan and the National Security Act. And it takes the floor from under their entire argument that they're the party of national security. But in light, Congresswoman, in light of the skepticism among some Republicans about the merits of the border deal, challenges to its passage, what do you think are the key fact legislation, and how might this impact the ongoing efforts to address the immigration and border crisis?
Yeah, so I think, knowing how Senator Schumer operates, that if he can get the votes in the Senate and be assured that it will not be filibustered, then I think he will put it on the floor. I don't think he will make a calculation based upon what the House is saying. I think that he will make sure that he moves the needle, and if the House doesn't take it up, then the House doesn't take it up. But I think he is focused very much so on his own chamber and making sure that he's got the votes to be able to get it passed. It's only in the House here recently that they put things up and they don't have the votes. But typically when you are leading a body, whether that's state or federal, you usually make sure you know how to count first. And it is a very rare thing to see things fail once it makes it to the floor. So obviously he'll have all the Democrats. The question is, will he have enough to keep from filibustering? And I think he absolutely can. I think that he can get enough support to actually get this thing across in the Senate. And we've got the top 3 or 4 in the House that are absolutely saying they will not take it up. It's dead on arrival. And I think Schumer is going to dare them. And then basically, most likely, Schumer will then call out the House if they fail to do their jobs.
Amidst all of this, in terms of negotiations surrounding the border bill, there is the effort to impeach Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The committee vote, Speaker Mike Johnson promising a full vote of the House soon after. If the House impeaches Secretary Mayorkas, of course, this would be the first time the House had done so since 1876, 148 years ago. I want to get your opinion about the ongoing effort to impeach the secretary and how this would impact specifically your district if this is carried out successfully.
Yeah, it's more gamesmanship, and it's really sad. And I hope that the American people see what's going on, because you're saying, hey, we've got this border crisis, fix it, fix it, fix it. And then they say, hey, we've got a bill to fix it. They say, never mind, we don't want a bill. And then they say, but our fix is to get rid of the guy that's leading the charge, leading the agency. And ultimately, this would still be another cabinet appointment. So, I mean, you're slowing down the process. You're making it worse by getting rid of the guy that's at the top. I think that it's very clear that their agenda has nothing to do with being efficient, nothing to do with being fiscally responsible, nothing to do with actually meeting the moment. And it has everything to do with politicking and making sure that Trump is in the best situation he can be in when it comes to reelection, because they basically want to hand out impeachments as if they are on the Oprah show. And you get one and you get one and you get one, to try to make it seem as if what happened under the Trump administration, having 2 impeachments, the only person in our history to ever be impeached twice. I think what he wants to do is they want to have this argument that impeachments are nothing. And so they're treating them like nothing. Same thing that they're doing with censures. It's like they used to mean something. We've had a historic number of censures in this session because they are trying to basically water down the entirety of the institution. And people should be concerned that they literally are tearing apart the institution brick by brick, kind of like what we saw on January 6th. That was the beginning of the end of the institution if we are to allow the Republicans to retain control. They physically started tearing us down where everyone could see it before their eyes. And now they are more so not necessarily physically, but theoretically tearing us down. And I shouldn't even say theoretically. It's less tangible. Let me say it that way, because it's not theoretical. This is a very real threat that they represent. And ultimately, they know that Mayorkas will never be convicted. They know that they have failed to state a high crime or misdemeanor that Mayorkas has committed. And they are also setting off on a terrible precedent to where it's a matter of, if I just disagree with you, if you're of the opposite party, we're just going to impeach you. That is absolutely wild to me, in addition to the fact that it's an enormous waste of our resources, and taxpayers and voters should all be offended that this is how they're spending their money when people in this country are still hurting. I know that we are experiencing record when it comes to job unemployment. It's at a record low as it relates to African Americans in this country. And we have so many things to brag about economically overall. If we're talking about the fact that the stock market is hitting record highs, there's so many things that we can talk about that are amazing. But the reality is that when you live in a capitalist society, there are always people that are struggling. That is what capitalism looks like. There will always be people that are struggling. And so the question is, will we go ahead and spend time trying to make sure that we can lessen the burdens of those that are struggling? And that's what we're not doing, because instead we're playing games. And people should be very offended, because while we know that wages, the bottom wages are now going up instead of just those at the top making more, it's still not enough. People are still struggling. And so there's still more that we can do, whether it's looking at other drugs that we can reduce the prices on, especially these life-sustaining medications, or whether it's making sure that we are retooling people in this country as we are going to experience this transition into AI. And what does that look like? There's a lot of work that we really need to do, and we're not getting it done.
So, Congressman, we have the Iowa caucuses behind us, the New Hampshire primaries behind us, and tonight, Tuesday night, is the Nevada primaries. Trump's dominance is evident, but also there's a significant portion of voters that have seemed to opt out for other candidates, although there's still primarily one other candidate in the race, Nikki Haley. She has had a successful month of January in terms of fundraising, $16.5 million, which is a record high watermark for her campaign. What does this mixed result in terms of high fundraising numbers and also voter turnout for other candidates between January and right now? What does that signify for GOP unity, and how might it influence the upcoming Republican primaries in your view?
Yeah, so I'm pretty positive that Trump is going to be the nominee. Regardless of how much money Nikki Haley raises, it's about who can get, the top numbers. And at this point, he's the one, right? And I don't know if Nikki is hanging on, waiting on him to go broke, and then gonna campaign on that and say, listen, y'all were all behind him because y'all thought he was a good businessman. Clearly he's not a good businessman. He's a fraudster. So maybe you want to get behind somebody else. Maybe once he's got to actually pay for all these appeals, pay the bonds for all these appeals that he's seeking, or if she's waiting to see if Fani puts him in prison. I don't know. I don't know what Nikki is doing. It's clear that the donors want Nikki. They want someone that does not have the baggage that comes along with Trump. But at the end of the day, she's running out of time, and she's not built the momentum that she needs to build. This primary will not be going until November, and so I think that she's kind of wasting her time and she's spinning her wheels, but I am here for it because, now it's a two-person race basically. And it's a matter of, are you really going to tear him down and highlight the things that Democrats have been trying to say, and then allow us to use these as great campaign ads? So I am all for her staying in. I just think that it's a waste of time. But I think what's really interesting is the fact that there's been a talk about a lack of enthusiasm for the president, and how Joe Biden doesn't have enthusiasm. And honestly, I don't know if either side has enthusiasm right now. I think a lot of people are like, to hell with both of them. I don't know, right? But when you look at the primaries and the numbers, we know that, or the caucus for Iowa, we know that the numbers in Iowa show that there was a sharp decline in the amount of people that decided to participate in the caucus. Now, granted, they had weather, which was pretty extreme. But in addition to the fact that there was this low turnout, you also saw that of those that did show up, Trump barely carried 50%. When we look at New Hampshire, again, not necessarily record turnout, but again, not necessarily very strong support from the base. Now, you juxtapose that with what we saw in South Carolina and with President Biden. I mean, in New Hampshire, they ran a write-in campaign for the president, and he won. And then when we look at South Carolina, he got well over 90%. Now, people are saying, hey, only 4% of voters showed up. Okay, I hear you, but there's been a depressed voter turnout for these primaries on both sides. But I can tell you without doubt that overwhelmingly, the Democratic primary is supporting President Biden, whereas Trump isn't. And my question is, how will that play out in the general? Will those people that do not want Trump and are rejecting him, will they come into the fold, or will they vote for a libertarian or somebody else, or will they cross over and vote for Biden? I don't know. And I think that that's where we find out, if we could get a crystal ball, who absolutely has the real shot at winning the election, is if we figure out, where do these almost 50% of Republicans go? Do they stay at home? Do they come out and vote for a third party, or do they come out and they swap over to President Biden?
Charlamagne, someone who a lot of folks tune into on his platform, The Breakfast Club, has openly said that he regrets putting his support behind President Biden in 2020. He criticized the president's record for not doing enough for the African-American community. I want to get your response to that criticism for young African-Americans who may be tuning into the platform. And also the fact that Nikki Haley seems to have made it a goal of hers to compare herself to Kamala Harris, the vice president. She's repeatedly said, God help us if Vice President Harris becomes president. She's outrightly said she doesn't even believe President Biden could survive a second term, which I think is classless. But she has been invited to the Breakfast Club. She was talking with Charlamagne, and she emphasized that same rhetoric. And then she said that the next female president would either be her or Kamala Harris, and that Kamala Harris' presidency should send, quote unquote, chills up your spine.
Yeah, so I did the Breakfast Club, and I was waiting on Charlamagne to act out with me. I was waiting because we was gonna be fighting it out. So I made it clear about the president and the vice president's record. I talked about what the administration has done, specifically on HBCUs. I think that it's almost laughable that people believe that Trump and his administration would do more for HBCUs than an HBCU grad herself, right? And so there's been a $7 billion investment under this administration in HBCUs. Now, most people don't know it because they didn't parade in all the presidents to take some photo and have a photo op like Trump did, but Trump didn't put new investments into HBCUs. Trump threatened not to reauthorize the $250 million that HBCUs have been getting. That is what happened. And it was a member of the Black Caucus that would not give up on that issue. And finally, the administration decided that they would sign on to the reauthorization to the tune of $250 million. But it is not compared to the $7 billion investment that has been made thus far. And we're only 3 or 4 years in to this administration. So that's number one. Number two, I think that if I'm to quote Plies, I guess I shouldn't quote Plies because he was cussing all in his rant. But Plies just went on a rant, and Plies was making it clear that the administration needs to brag on themselves. As I stated just a minute ago, we are at a record low for African American unemployment. We've seen an increase in wages. And one of the things that no one ever really talks about is the fact that well, actually, let me go to student loans since we're talking to students real quick, and then I'll go to the other thing. So even on student loans, I know people are saying, well, you promised this and you promised that. Well, it's not that the president didn't sign off on the executive orders. What he didn't anticipate was these raggedy three justices that Trump put on the court that are so far right wing and absolutely don't care nothing about Black folk, according to their decision on affirmative action as well as student loans. One of the things that the administration denoted is that there would be a disproportionate positive impact on people of color if they could have this student loan debt relief. And it's not just a matter of getting rid of the debt, but this is a matter of having the ability to build wealth. Because when you try to buy a home, they're looking at your debt to income ratio. And so if you can reduce the amount of debt you have so that you can get into a home, then that allows a person to build generational wealth. And so this is what we're talking about when we're really trying to bring people out of poverty and give them a real leg to stand on. And so, yeah, the Supreme Court struck down the big chunk of what the administration was trying to do. But to be clear, there have been $137 million worth of student loan debt that has been forgiven under this administration, and that has positively impacted 7 million people. Trump can't say that. And the final thing that I'll say specifically about this administration, I don't even have to talk about reproductive access and reproductive rights and what we won't have and what we will have depending on who we go with. But if we start to talk about environmental injustice issues. So we know that Black and brown communities have just been a dumping ground for corporate waste individuals, whether it's shingle plants, cement plants, asphalt plant, whatever it is, they have been dumping on us. And so everybody talks about Flint, and everyone was so outraged about Flint. Well, we've got a Flint in almost every major metropolitan city that you can find. And so this administration, they made sure that they made a historic amount of investments to make sure that environmental injustice is actually being addressed. I have personally handed out millions of dollars in my district to clean up Superfund sites, to make sure that we are assessing what pollutants are in the air, in the water, in the soil, as well as the remediation funds, so that these areas can be cleaned up and they won't necessarily be killing us. Because I do have people that are living with asthma that is strictly based on the environment that they're in, as well as those that have suffered cancer diagnoses and other illnesses really based upon their environments. And so this is something this administration cares about. We know that they want to roll back a lot of the environmental protections. They have been trying to do so right now. And so, you know, whether or not we are continue to be poisoned in this country and killed really depends on, again, who you vote for. And that's not to be hyperbolic. That's just to be real. And I just don't think that those messages are really getting across. You know, instead we hear from rappers like Sexy Red that want to tell us about, you know, well, we got a stimulus check, and act like Trump the only one that handed it down, and act like it was Trump's doing in the first place. It was the Democratic House and the Democratic Senate that actually put this legislation together. It was not initiated by the Trump administration, and he simply signed it into law and slowed down people's ability to get their money because he wanted his name on the check. But Biden sent out checks as well. He just didn't make a big show of it, so that people would try to give him credit as if he went into his own piggy bank and gave them money. But I got news for everybody: we ain't getting no more checks. We not doing it. It was a part of the pandemic, and I'll be darned if we have another pandemic. So, because there again have been investments into research to make sure that we don't end up with another pandemic, and to also make sure that we are playing Big Brother, which is the role that we have historically played. Yet Trump is the one that decided to roll back the monies that allowed us to be Big Brother and monitor what was going on around the world. We are the world leaders. It's not just the United States here. We lead the world, and we need to finally have world-class leadership. And right now, that is what is absent in the Congress.
Well, Representative Crockett, thank you so much for being on the Political Mic tonight. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you and having you educate us, our audience, about what's at stake in this crucial election. I just want to also put a plug in. I know you said you hate or dislike the Senate. I think the Senate would be a much better institution with you in it. I don't know if 26 is on horizon for you, but I just want to be the first to endorse a potential Senate campaign. Thoroughly enjoyed you. With that being said, thank you so much again, Congresswoman. That's going to conclude.
Thank you. I enjoyed you.
That's going to conclude episode 125 of the Political Mic podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
Hi, it's Mike Taylor, the host of the Political Mic podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, I want to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I also want to ask you to please follow along on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Amazon Music. You can also follow along and keep up with the conversation through our Telegram channel. Follow us on Twitter at @ThePolyMic, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you so much, and no matter what part of the political spectrum that you fall on, I want to encourage you to stay engaged, stay a part of the conversation, and stay informed. Thank you.